Its thing. Yeah, I'm over in Portland, Maine, which for those folks that are familiar with Portland, Oregon, I say, well, the real Portland, Portland, Maine. And I grew up in New England and have spent most of my time on the East Coast, so it's great to be out here on the West Coast and see how the world works differently. I was speaking earlier with someone who was involved in NOAA and had been involved in a lot of New England issues, and she said, "Oh, the Pacific, it's different." So I want to tell you a little bit more about what's been going on in our neck of the woods on our side of the country. And it's really, I wanted to thank Julia for having me out here, and Joe Smith, who's been helping me out, and David Armstrong, who suggested that I perhaps would be a good Bevan speaker. And let me see if I can get this clicker clicking. There's a trick. There we go. Just to familiarize some of you, this is the Gulf of Maine, and we are the Gulf of Maine, which reaches down to Cape Cod and all the way up to Nova Scotia, Portland, somewhere around there. And I wanted to let you know a little bit about the institute that I work for. Many of you probably aren't familiar with it. It's called the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. It's a nonprofit organization, and we are focused on bringing the Gulf of Maine bioregion, the people and the resources, bringing them to their ultimate potential. And the way in which we do that, we're trying to ensure the vitality of that ecosystem and foster informed culture of participation. And that is a lot of what I'll be talking about, is how we're doing that within both the Gulf of Maine Research Institute and within New England. I guess there's a little delay. We do that at our institute by addressing critical knowledge gaps. We have a whole research team that focuses primarily on fishery ecosystem research in the Gulf of Maine. We also are working on engaging students, primarily in the 5th and 6th grade, with educating that whole cadre of people about how they can engage in science, and in marine science in particular, and bringing diverse stakeholders together to achieve both innovative solutions to marine science and to management challenges. So enough about GMRI. I'm going to talk today about the cultural perspective to both science and management. It's my belief that, excuse me, that we all share a common goal of sustainable fisheries, and each has a valuable insight to share. And it's really the nexus of these three where there can be a lot of insights gained. And I'm going to provide an overview of sort of collaborative research, the how, the who, the what, and then get into a specific example called the Marine Research Education Program, which has helped to bring people new ways to engage in both the scientific process and the management process in New England. So let's begin. I thought I would start with a little definition, so we're all starting with the same background. A lot of folks talk about cooperative or collaborative research, and often in the scientific realm, I hear people talking about collaborations within the same or across scientific disciplines, physical oceanographers working with biological oceanographers, and they'll talk about that as a collaborative research project, or research economics folks working with some of the biological folks. What I'm talking about today, and what I'll be talking about this afternoon, is fishermen and scientists working together and collaborating. And that's the nature of the collaboration. And it can move from what in the literature goes from cooperative research, where there's limited participation by the industry, and often it's a survey type of project, and fishing vessels are just a platform. But the more developed projects are collaborative and fully collaborative in nature, where the idea is usually stemmed from a fisherman and scientist getting together. They partner on the proposal and often on the funding of the project, including fishing industry members putting in funding towards the project, and they jointly discuss the results. So there is this continuum between cooperative research and collaborative research. As I talk, I'm going to use them interchangeably, but I think it's important to know that there is that distinction. And I am not an expert in this. So in New England, and I think it is different than it's been out here, fishermen have gone to sea for generations and generations and generations. And the way that they have executed their fishery is by pure knowledge and grit and getting out there and doing hard work. And the success of a fisherman these days is dependent on more than just those things. They need to have knowledge and an understanding of the quality of the fishery science that goes into making the management decisions that affect them. And that is a very different environment than many of the fishermen that I work with grew up with over the years. They have unique knowledge that they can bring to the table. And then there's the scientific and the management process. I've put up here, this is often the federal counting team. This is often how fishermen have portrayed and thought of the scientists within our region. Again, it was helpful, Julia, for you to remind me that in other parts of the U.S., the process might be different. This is the groundfish stock status in 2004, and groundfish has driven a lot of collaborative research in the region. I'll speak to that a little bit. But a lot of fishermen look at this grid and overfished and overfishing and MSY and biomass targets, and it's extremely confusing, and maybe even for some people that are students here. And then this is a timeline of the Amendment 13 process, back to 1994 and all the way through to 2003. The science and the management is complex. It's a complex environment to work. And often, the three communities are speaking different languages. You've got the scientist that's thinking about the scientific method and the process and having a hypothesis and questioning that. Every scientific paper I read, at the end it says, well, here are 5 more questions that I came up with. Fishermen are trying to integrate multiple variables. It's not just a cause and effect. They're looking at lunar cycles. They're looking at engine and diesel prices. They're looking at fish biology. They are the ultimate naturalists, and they're looking at the system really as a whole often. And the managers are thinking in terms of a risk assessment. If we let a fisherman catch so many fish, what's the risk? Should we take the precautionary approach? So they have 3 different ways in which they're thinking of the world in that layer. The scientists, as you all are familiar, have a peer review process. And it's being reviewed by your peers, and publishing is what drives the scientific career. Fishermen are business negotiators. And the managers are thinking about policy and planning, legal implications of their decisions. And all these different levels and different cultures also have different time scales. A scientist can be thinking about a decadal time scale in terms of the species they're looking at. Fishermen are often looking at daily decisions, and those decisions can be decisions that impact their livelihood and also their lives, and sort of a monthly horizon. Managers, and as I showed you in that Amendment 13 timeline, they can be looking at 2 to 3 years to implement a management decision. And in Amendment 13, that was 9 years. So they're very different time scales, and those cultures need to be bridged. But I believe that bridging that gap, and by doing that, you can find critical ways in which to improve sustainability of the fisheries and improve decision making. So let me talk about why to engage in collaborative research. Collaborative research can bring mutual learning and information exchange. It provides improvements in the data collection. By talking with fishermen, the scientists often learn about the things and places and habitats that they didn't realize existed. It provides transparent and understandable science with tangible outcomes. Most of the collaborative research projects that have been going on in New England are for a management-specific purpose. It can be a cost-effective platform. Using fishing vessels versus using a research vessel can be much more cost-effective. Builds trust and respect among fishermen, scientists, and managers, which is key. And again, in our region, that's been particularly important given some of the divisiveness of the decisions. It does improve the decision-making climate because of that trust. And ultimately, it can facilitate a broader ecosystem perspective and shared responsibility if these 3 cultures can learn how to work together better. Fishermen gain an appreciation of the scientific process. Why do things take so long to come up with these results? Scientists get better insight into what's really going on the water and some of the fishermen's experience. And managers are provided with information that is relevant to the management questions and is understood by the stakeholders. So what's been going on in New England? Well, some of you may know, and some of us experienced, in the mid-1990s, the New England ground fishery was in a state of upheaval. There was a lot of distrust. Fishermen didn't trust the scientists. The scientists were very concerned about the resource. The managers were grappling with how to cut back days at sea, yet keep livelihoods sustainable. And Amendment 13 came along, and there were lawsuits, and there was an extremely divisive environment. And Amendment 13 resulted in fishermen being cut the number of days at sea they had. And Congress, as Congress sometimes does, stepped in and said, well, we'll allocate some disaster relief funds to try to mitigate some of the social impacts of the changes that are necessary for management purposes. And to the credit of some people in the fishing community, they said, we don't want a handout. What we'd like is we'd like to be able to use our boats as platforms to be able to get more information to help us all learn what we don't know, because clearly we don't know enough because we're not managing the right way. So the collaborative research programs were started in New England with that as the background. The process that was used, there are actually two major organizations that were formed. One's called the Northeast Consortium, which is out of the University of New Hampshire and is actually a consortium of sea grant institutions. They receive federal funding, as well as the Cooperative Research Partners Program, which is out of the National Marine Fisheries Service office. And what we did in New England is we set, it is hard to have these dual things here. We did a lot of work on setting research priorities and doing a lot of scoping. What are the kind of questions that need to be asked and need to be answered, with fishermen and scientists and managers in the room, collectively trying to figure out what's the best way to use these resources. And most importantly, or particularly important, and again, not being familiar with the Pacific Council, but New England Council, we changed our management approach, and there was actual advisory committee created, the Research Steering Committee, which helped guide how research was going to be done collaboratively in New England. And that was a big change and a big focus, trying to bridge those important gaps. Let's see if this works. Nothing is without its challenges, of course. Although we were fortunate in New England to have funding, that doesn't always mean that the funding was enough or that it was consistent. And often, the limited in the funding can bring some tensions and undermine the commitment to partnerships that the fishermen and the scientists have as they're doing collaborative research projects. As I mentioned earlier, those three different cultures and integrating fishermen's knowledge into the scientific process is often difficult, and there are constraints around that. One of my most regular conversations I have with fishermen is, why are you randomly sampling? What's this random sample design stuff? I know where the fish are. If you want to know how many there are, go to this spot and count them, and that's how many fish there are. Getting that, many times have I had to explain in many different ways why there's random sampling and how does that work and how does that actually provide the right answers. That was confusing. That still remains confusing for fishermen and others of us who don't have a statistical background. There's also constraints in terms of the management framework. In New England, we have a lot of closed areas. There were a lot of times where fishermen wanted to go into the closed areas and they couldn't to do their research. Or there were other times where they could only have a certain amount of days to go fishing, and that played on how that scientific project was actually executed. Reconciling issues such as permitting and information control. So the scientists have the data. The fishermen often want to take that data and use it before sometimes the scientist's ready to have it be put out in public because they haven't peer-reviewed, they haven't analyzed it. Reconciling those differences and the different timescales is one of the major challenges. And allocating enough time for frequent communication. When fishermen and scientists engage in a collaborative research project, they often underestimate the fact that it takes more planning and it takes more conversation. But like any relationship in our lives, if you want to establish a better relationship with someone, talk to them more. And that is a key lesson to be learned. There was a survey done of roughly 30 fishermen, scientists, and managers. It was done for a conference the American Fishery Society put on. And these are some of the things that they pointed to as success factors for collaborative research. As I just mentioned, communicating, among partners early and often and frequently. Defining clear roles and expectations, especially around things like the data and how it's going to be used and who's going to get to see it first. Planning, establishing clear, relevant, and agreed upon objectives. Oftentimes, even though you might have written a proposal, I've had fishermen partway through a project think that they were trying to answer one question, and really the science that had been drawn up and the proposal that had been funded really probably wasn't going to address that question. And that needs to be made clear up front what the science can answer and can't answer. Appreciation of the scientific method and those management pressures I discussed. Valuing your partners. Being open-minded and ready to learn from each other. Again, in New England, it was a climate of distrust, and just having people be able to say, I will work, I believe that a scientist can help me out from a fisherman's perspective, or the scientist willing to get on a fisherman's boat and thinking that they have something to gain and something to value is a key component of having a successful relationship. Often, involvement of project leaders or extension agents. I spent some time earlier talking to some of the Washington Sea Grant folks, and it's often folks like that can help work through how you get an idea that a fisherman has or an idea that a scientist has and work together. And remaining flexible. And obviously, something that everyone's familiar with in any project, collaborative or not, leveraging funding is always an important part of a success factor for any project. I'm going to take a sip of this first. I put this up here, and I don't want you to focus on the details, but what it was my attempt to do as someone who's not graphically inclined was to give a timeline of what's been going on in New England and some indication of how the community's been engaged and what engagement has meant and how collaborative research in the scientific community has been working together. So over here on the left, I'll just take as an example. Back in the late 90s, there was a series of processes where fishermen and scientists and managers got together to talk about what are their priorities, the scoping process. Many projects down here led from those workshops. And in fact, what you're seeing in New England now is as a result of these projects, some of which are very short in terms of their timeline and very specific in terms of the question they're asking, and some of them are longer in terms of our herring acoustic survey over 5 years, or the cod tagging project that we've been involved in. The results of that research are now beginning to make it back into the management realm. And that's the exciting thing, both for the fishermen and the scientists and the managers that are involved in collaborative research, is seeing that their work and their ideas and the results of their research are making an impact in everyone's day-to-day decisions. There's been an area in Amendment 13, there was an area that was now open to shrimping as a result of some shrimp experimental gear work that was done. The cod tagging work is being used in the upcoming GARM report to think through if the migration that has been typically used is the right migration pattern. And there's information that's being used in the lobster assessment in regards to lobster diet. Those are just 3 small examples. But it gives an indication where many people have said, well, is it making an impact? Yeah, it is making an impact. And some of that's more obvious in some projects than others. There are over 260 scientists, 65 scientists from 57 different research institutions in New England that have been involved in collaborative research. And these are numbers that are provided by the Northeast Consortium, which is the largest funding body of much of this research. 395 fishermen and 35 industry organizations. So collaborative research is having an impact on New England. And it's been something that has been successful in bridging those gaps. What I wanted to do now is transition over to a particular project that I've been intimately involved with, which deals with joint learning among the fishing, scientific, and management communities in New England. And that's called the Marine Resource Education Program. And that program was started back in 2000. And it's a training program that's made up of 2 3-day modules. One module is focused on fishery science, and the other 3-day module is focused on the fishery management process. And I'll get into a little bit detail what what's included in those curricula. But as I was mentioning earlier, if you think about the climate that we were experiencing in New England, there was a lot of distrust, a lot of fishermen and scientists, managers that were frustrated with the process from all different angles. And there was a group of fishermen and academics. Any of you are familiar with Andy Rosenberg. Andy Rosenberg was one of the folks that at that point was in academia that is working with some fishermen and some other people within the Northeast region to think about how can we jumpstart the knowledge base of fishermen in particular, but also improve the relationships with scientists and managers. How can we help people understand what the scientific process is about, engage them in collaborative research, and also help them understand the federal process? Many of you here are graduate students. You're going to 2 years to learn some of this stuff. If you want to be engaged in the fishery management process and you're a fisherman, you don't have time to go through a 2-year master's program, but those decisions are impacting your livelihood. And so a lot of people were thinking about how can we cram that information into a short period of time. So what they came up with was first securing the funding, and it's Northeast Consortium that helped fund this program as well, the Cooperative Research Program. They came up with a program that focuses on several goals, and those goals include bringing fishermen and scientists and managers together to learn about each other and establish trust. That's a key goal of this program. Making sure that fishermen are knowledgeable enough to understand and be comfortable navigating the fishery science arena and the fishery management arena. Bringing policymakers and scientists into the room to help them understand what the fishing community is going through. Trying to establish leadership within all those communities as we've been grappling with difficult problems. And also breaking down some of these historical barriers and engaging fishermen in science and scientists with fishermen and managers together to help bridge those gaps. The program is approximately 20 to 25 participants, and the selection process, there's an application process, and the selection process includes being deliberate about who's in the room. Too often, a lot of people have asked me about the program, and they say, oh, can I just have your curriculum? This program isn't about just what people are taught. It's a lot about what they talk about at lunch and what they talk about at dinner. Much like I expect how the Bevan lecture is set up, you'll hear from me for 45 minutes, but I've been talking to graduate students before, and I'm sure I can talk to some of you afterwards. And it's that type of interaction that we're trying to foster through this program. So there's deliberate and diverse participation in the program. In New England, folks from Gloucester are a different culture and have been living, a lot of them in New Bedford or Portuguese. Getting those folks to talk to folks from Maine, getting the Cape Cod folks who are out of the tip of Cape Cod to talk to other people in other regions is really important in terms of having people understand when the council gets together why it's so difficult for them to make their decisions. There's a large geographical range, even though comparatively speaking it's small geographic. What we did is brought together experts in the region that dealt with, that were from the New England Fishery Management Council staff, experts from our National Marine Fisheries Service, and people that were willing and ready and very interested in getting involved with the fishing community and learning more and sharing what they knew. And what we create in the 2 different workshops we do is really an open and thoughtful exchange and an opportunity for people to sit back and allow each other outside of the regulatory arena, which is a divisive environment, allow them to poke and prod and ask questions. Steve Morawski, who I understand was here last week, was one of the first people to teach part of the science module. And I'm sure he'll attest that he enjoyed, as he is a busy person, he enjoyed coming all the time and put his time and effort into it because he could hear back what was going on in the fishing community. And it's that sort of exchange and that open dialogue we have a person from the fishing community who actually facilitates the meetings. So it's not a classroom setting. It's not someone who's standing up there teaching. It's a person in the fishing community who's able to help facilitate that dialogue. And that's been part of the process. Just to give you a more indication of, well, what is it we cover? Well, in 3 days, we cover fishery science. Concepts in population biology and statistics and stock assessment and modeling. We get into fishing gear operations, general oceanography, science and ecosystem-based management. If you want a hot topic, which I'm sure you all are talking about, get a bunch of fishermen, scientists, and managers in the room and throw out there your different theories about where we're going with ecosystem-based management. And we also talk about collaborative research. So those are all the things that get covered in a 3-day intensive workshop where everyone's expected to stay and be together for a limited, intense 3-day period of time. And it's allowing people to connect with science and allowing them to think about what that means and how that relates back to what people are seeing on the water. For those of you that are involved in the marine policy side of things, this may look familiar, but this is all part of the pieces that fit in with the fishery management process in New England. I don't think you have a commission out here. Sorry, this pointer's getting the best of me. Okay. But on the East Coast, we have the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is interjurisdictional fisheries that's part of or comes out of the Atlantic Fisheries Cooperative Management Act. There's the Magnuson-Stevenson Fishery Conservation Management Act, which has been reauthorized now. Congress has a role, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, National Environmental Policy Act. All of these pieces, oh, by the way, there's states. All of these pieces play a part in any fisherman's ability to catch a certain species at a certain time within certain waters. And it's very confusing. Certainly it was confusing for me as a student, and it's confusing for fishermen, and often for scientists who aren't involved in this process. So what we've done is boil that down. And again, for 3 days, we cover really what is the national framework for fisheries management. But most importantly, there are 2 pieces of this that are the most important, and that is thinking about, one, what's the New England Fisheries Management Council? Who's on it? How do you get involved? What are the advisory councils? Really allowing fishermen and scientists and others, because there are people that participate in the program that are from environmental groups, people that are from academia, and helping them think about how can I actually be active in this process. How many here have attended a New England Fisheries Management Council meeting? The first, I remember, what kind of experience was it, Julia? People often talk about it being intimidating, and certainly you're going up to the mic, you're being recorded. Even for those of us that might speak for a living, it's an intimidating process. So being able to understand what it is, what's going on, what's Robert's Rules of Order? They're up there, and there are these motions. For many people, that's intimidating and hard, and we help navigate that. The other important thing that we cover, which I don't think is covered enough, both in academic settings and other, is negotiation skills. We all negotiate all the time, and we spend a whole half day going through a case study where folks are negotiating and really thinking about, well, what's my position and what's my interest? And that really helps when people are later getting to the table and thinking about what they're hearing and trying to get others to elicit what their interests are. So in a nutshell, that's what we go through with the Marine Resource Education Program. We've had roughly 250 or so participants. I noted this is through August. We're actually, as we speak, just finishing up another module in York, Maine right now. Of that, 150 or so are commercial fishermen. There are 20 recreational and charter fishermen, which for us is a population that's not as active in New England as the commercial fishermen yet. 9 environmental advocates, and 46 participants that are scientists and managers and from academia and other places. And it has had an impact in enhancing the Cooperative Research Partnership Program. It's also had an impact on the number of people that are actually involved in the management process. There are now, I got ahead of myself. There are now 7 or 8 out of the New England Fishery Management Council members that have gone through the MREP program. The New England Fishery Management Council is now not requiring, but strongly encouraging all their advisory council members to have gone through the MREP program. We've had 2 people from the South Atlantic Council go through the program and 1 from the Mid-Atlantic Council. We have 11 or 12 folks that are now on state commissions and another 40 or 50 that are on other sort of specific advisory boards, folks that have been involved in the Stellwagen Marine Sanctuary Program and someone that's been involved in the Pew Ocean Commissions. So people are getting more involved because they feel that they have the knowledge and at least have some background and can increase the dialogue in the region around fishery and science issues. What MREP has done, the Marine Resource Education Program, it's really valued the information that fishermen bring to the table. And it's promoting cooperative efforts between the fishermen scientists and the managers. Fishermen are now more comfortable working in the scientific information. And as I noted, many of them have been involved in both collaborative research projects and involved in the management process. From 2001 to 2005, there was a program assessment, and this was done by Mimi Becker and William Flegler, who are at the University of New Hampshire. And what they did is they did a survey of past participants in the Marine Resource Education Program, and it's nice to say people are involved, but is this really working? Well, 71 people responded, about a third were fishermen, a third were scientists, and a third were from other disciplines, such as managers or policymakers or environmentalists. And they were asked, has MREP been successful in creating awareness and promoting involvement in collaborative research? Well, a majority of them said, yes, it's been successful or very successful. So only a quarter of them felt it was average. So they really believe that the program helped them become more involved in collaborative research. Has it helped fishermen increase their understanding of how fishery science and management systems works? Absolutely. A majority of people felt that the program, 93% felt it was either successful or very successful in achieving that very important goal that I outlined earlier. How come? And alternatively, if you remember, one of the other goals was our science and policy professionals becoming more familiar with fishermen. And indeed, yes, the science and policy professionals felt that by participating and becoming more engaged, they were learning more about what was really going on out there on the water and what the fishing communities were dealing with. And most importantly, again, in my neck of the woods and on the other side of the country where there's been a lot of distrust, the question was asked has the Marine Resource Education Program, and I think this can be extended to cooperative research in general, has it built a sense of trust towards the process? And indeed, yes. By having that kind of dialogue, it has increased or greatly increased the sense of trust. There are a few lessons learned, and I've been asked from other people in other parts of the country who've been interested in the Marine Resource Education Program. Wow, it sounds great. Can I do that in my neck of the woods? Well, there's no quick fix. We've been doing it for 5 years. The community has changed. The fishery has changed. But it takes a long time, as does cooperative research. There's a national framework for some of this information. The curriculum that we cover is basic, but it's really a regional approach. I'm sure what you would do on this side of the U.S. would be different than what we would do in the Northeast because we've had different problems and different issues, and our council it works in different ways. We've had to join forces, and it was important to have that original base of academic folks and folks from the Science Center and others to get involved in the program and participate. The program has been really beneficial if there's what I consider total immersion. Again, in the interactions that people have over lunch and over dinner and over the downtime and definitely in the bar were the ways that people really learned about each other, not sitting in a classroom. And that dialogue has yielded engagement in science and engagement in the management process, which is what we've been looking for over now almost a decade. I thought it was important to think about, well, how does this relate to an ecosystem approach to management and sustainable fisheries? Well, I've covered, fishermen and scientists need to work together to ensure an abundant resource. I strongly believe that. I don't think any one of those cultures is unique in its ability to help think about the system. All of us are part of that ecosystem, and the humans are an important element that we often forget. However, those cultures are different, and it is very important to operate within those different cultures. So the more we understand about each other, the more it might be easier to move forward a very important dialogue. And engaging and having new insights can be gained through having those different types of relationships. And I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that Troy Hartley and Alicia Reed from the University of New Hampshire have done a lot of work through the American Fisheries Society in the 2005 conference on cooperative research and cooperative management. And much of what I brought today is a result of some of their work. As I mentioned, Mimi Becker-Larson was very instrumental in the Marine Resource Education Program and its inception and also assessing it. The partners that I've worked with are John Williamson, who's now at the Ocean Conservancy, who's actually a former commercial fisherman. Mary Beth Tooley is part of the O'Hara Group, which is they have a series of herring fishing vessels. And Meredith Mendelsohn is a staff person. We've all been working on that Marine Resource Education Program, and it's taken a lot of people and a lot of thought. And numerous fishermen, scientists, and managers that I've been fortunate to work with over the past decade have helped shape my thinking about why I think the work that we've done has been successful and is quite rewarding. And that is all I have. Oregon. Today it was Washington. Alaska. The South Atlantic. Pretty much every part of the country now has expressed some type of interest. At the national level, the cooperative research, the folks that are focused on cooperative research have started with the changes in Magnuson, there was more focus on cooperative research, and there have been some staff now that have been dedicated to thinking about cooperative research. And many of those staff people have asked me to present and help them think through ideas. I'd say the place I think is most ripe is in the South Atlantic. I think that's the place that probably is ready for this type of program. And I say that because I've talked to different people within different communities there, academic communities and environmental communities and fishermen that say they really be interested in putting money towards doing a program like this. Yes?
How did help make research come to be the one spearheading the program?
I'm sorry if I gave that impression because I don't want to give you that impression. It's actually, it was the University of New Hampshire that started the MREP program, and it was through John Williamson and Mary Beth Tooley, actually, who had worked with Andy Rosenberg, who previously was the regional administrator and very involved in fisheries policy in the region. He left the government and went into academia, and both John and Mary Beth had worked with him and said, you know what, we need this type of program. We need to be able to engage people differently, and everyone needs to understand each other a little bit more, and can you help us think about how to do it? So they actually started that. What was decided about 3 years ago was that being an academic institution was difficult with the schedule, and it's a fairly rigorous program to run. So both Mary Beth and John approached us as a neutral, nonpartisan organization that they felt could actually enhance bringing the program forward. So we've had it for the past 3 years. Yep.
Mine is a little bit related to that. How much was needed from sort of the state agencies and other scientific groups to line that a lot of our
For the Marine Resource Education Program? The funding for it was through this cooperative research funding, which is primarily focused on federal fisheries. So that, much to the chagrin of a lot of the lobster fishermen, which are more managed by state policies than federal policies, most of the participants have been focused on federal fisheries. Therefore, the state agencies haven't been involved as much as the federal agencies. So, and we get incredible support from both the Science Center, that really sees value in having a constituency that understands what they're doing and understands what they're about, and can see them outside of an assessment process, as well as from the regional office and from the New England Fishery Management Council staff. All three of them have really seen value in having folks that understand each other better. It helps them do their jobs. There, and then I'll go back. Mm. Two good questions. One, as far as the assessment, and that was work that Mimi did. I think she did break it down, and my guess is if that was to dig deeper. There were many more questions that I didn't put up here because I wasn't quite sure how much time it would have. So it's a great suggestion, and it certainly could be looked at. We're in the process of actually doing another assessment that's more individual, that tracks actual participants and looks at how did, as opposed to in the aggregate, it's more qualitative. What did certain people do after they did MREP? I can think of one fellow in particular who's my poster child at the moment. He's a monkfish fisherman. He's fairly young, but never been involved in science, never been involved in management. And he is now heavily involved. He's done 3 cooperative research projects with us, and he's on the Advisory Council for Monkfish, and he was doing testimony the other day for a conference. He's just gone from 0 to 100. And he says, he brings around the MREP notebook, and he says, I feel I can handle this because of the information you gave me and the networking. I know who to call. And stuff like that that's sort of intangible, but we're trying to quantify that. As far as the recreational folks, they're less, they have, in New England, they've been less organized and less active than they are to the south. They're just more dispersed. And so we haven't targeted them specifically. It really was targeted more at the commercial fishing industry that was feeling the brunt. Again, you go back to this being disaster relief funds, it was really feeling the brunt of what was going on in New England around groundfish. But there are many recreational and charter boat guys who have been very interested and are getting much more engaged. So I suspect those numbers will start going up for us. We've also gotten quite a bit of involvement with folks from New Jersey and New York now who fish in the Gulf of Maine, which hasn't happened until recently. There was a question back over here somewhere.
How
And the reason it's a tough question is because, I painted a nice, the world is wonderful, isn't it? We are all human, and in the end, everyone is still struggling with how to both understand and participate in science, as well as questioning it and challenging it when they think that it's not information that either they don't want to hear or that the information actually might be wrong. And I think we as a society will continue to do that. In New England, maybe a little bit more than others. I do think though, and I can give a good example is yellowtail flounder. Steve Caterin, who is at the school, he's a government scientist who's now at the School of Marine, SMAS, School of Marine Science and Technology in Massachusetts. Steve has given this course several times, done the statistics and how a VPN is done and all those pieces of the modeling. He was very involved in yellowtail flounder, and there's been a lot of controversy over a retrospective analysis there. I know a lot of the fishermen who don't agree with what the numbers are still respect and will talk to Steve and will call him, and they will have a different dialogue than they would have had before. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's satisfied and everyone's happy, but it means that the level of the dialogue, the depth of the dialogue, the kinds of questions he's asking, and the kinds of questions the fishermen are asking has changed. So that's my spin, I think, on the question that you asked.
First of all, a comment. There is a Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, but it's
Okay.
totally unlike the United States Small Research Army. But,
That's what I thought.
I guess was the original purpose of this to get fishermen involved in learning about science and management, or was it to teach them that so that they get more involved in cooperative research? And I guess sort of related to that, is your poster boy typical of others? Are people that weren't involved now getting more involved? Is that generally true, or is it just a few people here and there? I mean, is it working against? I mean, are more and more fishermen getting involved in the process?
Yes. Actually, yes to all the above. The goals of the project included getting people more comfortable with the science and the management process, so they would be involved in collaborative research and involved in the management process in a constructive way. Someone was referring to earlier in the day to me about, do they still throw chairs at the New England Fishery Management Council meetings? And I said, well, no, they don't throw chairs anymore at the New England Fishery Management Council meetings. And part of that is because, frankly, the people that threw the chairs are no longer there. That doesn't work. You've got to engage. And the people that have stuck it out have had ways, methods, tools to help them understand how can I harness this frustration and become engaged in a meaningful way. So I think, yes, people are becoming more engaged at different levels, both in cooperative research and in the management process. My monkfish poster boy, I can think of at least off the top of my head a dozen more that really have made a difference. It's made a difference for them.
Great.
One quick follow-up.
Sure. Wonderful.
The funding for this, is it through the states or?
It's been federal funding. It's been federal funding, and we've been lucky in that regard. There's no doubt about it. But I think there was a real need for it too.
Don't you want to ask the last one?
Oh, we've got.
Well, it sounds to me like the next question is, don't you think we could do that here too? That's not it?
No, the next question is what, these are earmarks, and did you get hit as hard as Alaska and the West Coast got hit in terms of?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is going to impact us all in different ways. However, I think now that we've done the program for so long, and there are a lot of people that really believe in the program, there are other ways, less expensive ways, we probably could still wind up doing it and making it be a useful program for people. But we'd have to reshape it. So we'll see. We're still good through 2009. So I'm worrying about 2010, which is a nice position to be in.
There you go. Well, that's definitely a note upon which to start drinking.
I'm ready now.